Hello, everybody. My name is Hiro Shimazato, and again, on behalf of Fictiv, I'd like to welcome to our webinar today. I am the Director of Product Management here at Fictiv, and with me today are our panel experts, and I'd like to introduce first Ann Torres. Ann is Senior VP of Engineering at Synapse, also Managing Director of the San Francisco office. Synapse has offices in San Francisco, Seattle, Orlando. Ann, tell us a little bit about yourself and welcome.
Yeah, thanks, Hiro. Actually, firstly, just wanted to thank Fictiv for hosting this panel, and also Chris and Hiro for participating in prepping this webinar with me. And then obviously everyone for joining us and making time to talk about these issues. Yeah, as Hiro said, hardware development has been a real challenge these last few months, but I've been really proud of the resilience and the effectiveness of the engineering teams that I've been working with. So I'm really excited to talk with everyone just about how we've been able to stay productive during this time. So let's see, my focus is, in my work, my focus is to support and empower engineering teams to solve challenging problems. I spent the last 20 years doing product development and technology in the Bay Area for larger companies like Apple and Google, Disney and iRobot, as well as ambitious startups. And most of my career, I've worked as a product development consultant. And at Synapse, I drive engineering teams to create solutions which help our clients transform their businesses.
Fantastic. Thank you for joining us today. Also on our panel, Chris Evans. Chris is Director of Engineering with Cooper Perkins, an engineering design firm. Also with multiple offices. I believe your headquarters are in Boston, but we have an office here in San Francisco as well. So
That's
welcome,
right.
Chris, and tell us a little bit about yourself.
Thank you. Yeah. Thanks, Hiro and Fictiv, for putting this on. And it's good working with you again, Ann. Cooper Perkins has an office just outside Boston and one in San Francisco also. Ann was in that office for some period of time. We're an engineering practice. We turn inventive ideas into innovative products. That's what we do. And it really does feel like we're at a cusp here where the nature of work and the balance between work and home is changing as a result of the pandemic. So I think this is a really relevant topic right now. So congratulations to Fictiv for putting on a webinar to talk about this. I think it's really valuable. My history is as a mechanical engineer. I've been involved in a lot of development of electromechanical systems, primarily as a mechanical engineer, but more recently as a project manager. I'm one of the directors of engineering at Cooper Perkins, and what we're responsible there is making sure that the team that we have has the tools that they need, has the right opportunities for talent development to provide exceptional value to our clients and exceptional experiences to our engineers. That's what we do, and we really enjoy it, and I appreciate being a part of this panel. So ready for some questions.
Great. Welcome, Chris, and thank you for, again, joining. Looking forward to hearing what you have to say. So today's agenda, we have several topics that we're going to cover that are listed here. Also, we will have a QA session at the end. And again, we'd love this webinar to be as interactive as possible. So please submit your questions and comments throughout the course of the webinar. And again, you can upvote on any topics or anything of particular interest. And we will try to work some of those questions into over the course of the webinar as we go over these topics. And again, as I mentioned at the head of of our webinar, we have, in addition to the QA section, we are offering basically 5 attendees. If you stick with us throughout the duration of the webinar, including the QA session, we will be giving 5 attendees $50 Steam gift cards. So if you haven't played on Steam yet, it's a fantastic online gaming platform where you can play sorts of games, and it's a fantastic little service, especially in these times when we're all trying to stay connected and have fun. In addition, we're going to be running some polls, and so we thought it would be a great way to kick off today's webinar with a poll. And the poll here is about what are the top challenges. So how has working remotely impacted hardware development for you? So you guys should all be seeing the poll appear on your screen. We'd love to have you guys participate and let us know. your feelings about how has working remotely impacted hardware development for you.
Yeah,
All
these
right,
are
and
some.
while,
Oh, sorry, Hero. Go ahead.
oh no, I was just going to say we're just going to see the results pop up in just a minute. But go ahead, Ann.
Yeah, I was just saying that this is these are some of the questions that we talk about with our teams, and we actually use polls quite often as a way to connect and collaborate, especially on some of our larger meetings, in order to have people feel like they're connected. And so we'd love to hear how this has impacted people in different ways.
Yeah, we've done the same thing. We did it at the beginning when we first started working from home, and we've just done it again recently. And it's interesting to see what's the same and what's different. So people still really miss interactions with their colleagues. That seems to be a central issue with working from home. But some of the other challenges that we thought we had at the beginning turned out not to be big challenges. And those are interesting also.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, it's funny though, the poll is such a great little tool within Zoom, just because, you know, only one person can really talk at a time, and this is a great way to just get a lot of feedback really quickly. Wow, let's look at the results here.
Yeah, and there you see the,
yeah,
misinteracting in person with my colleagues. That was the one that came out most. And I think that is a real challenge, something that we'll talk about later. But how do you address that working remotely?
Increased problem solving time, but less hands-on testing time is still, yeah. So that's obviously a huge one as well. Not surprising to see that result.
Yeah.
Fantastic.
And one of the things that we talked about too is just how the different responses are also broken down by the different disciplines. So, you know, my mechanical engineering team is significantly impacted by access to tools and collaboration around builds, and you know, our electrical engineering team in some way is as well. And then, you know, our software teams have less of an impact, but you know, they're also interacting and collaborating with some of the hardware. So
great. Well, let's get started. You know, as our audience members registered for this particular webinar, they were able to submit questions in advance, and I got to tell you, the overwhelming majority of questions that we received were on this next topic around tools and setups. You know, questions about, you know, how do you deal with workstation and equipment, and doing this with a team that's all scattered remotely? You know, how do you do this without building a shop in your own house? You know, which is, you know, interesting to imagine. You know, there were a lot of questions about prototyping, you know, doing low cost, fast turn prototypes, questions about prototyping without access to a shop. And I think there was just a general interest in seeing how everybody had configured things at home to support their engineering workflow. All right, well, why don't we get started here? All right, Ann, take it away.
Go for it, Ann.
Yeah, thanks. So I think here I'm excited about this section because we're really getting some kind of private home tours of some interesting office setups that people have created for themselves. We see here on the right side, this is an example of a vertical lab station setup that one of our lead electrical engineers, Zach, put together, and it's really inspired by a vertical farming system. But what you can see here and what I really appreciate is that in a very small footprint, he's able to create a very capable work environment. And so, you know, you go from having a very large lab and office space to a fairly compact space. Most of our team, because we have great labs and shops in our buildings, don't necessarily have a lot of equipment at home. They don't do a lot of work at home, and because they live in cities, often live in smaller spaces. So this is an example of one of those setups.
Yeah, I think it's interesting to see, you know, home spaces weren't designed to accommodate work requirements, and so people are adapting and they're doing what they can with what they have, and you see that with some of what's pointed out in that left picture. You know, what people use to put the monitors at the right height, to, to adjust the space that they've got to do what they need. People, we're engineers, we're problem solvers, and this is, you can think of this just as another problem. People are coming up with inventive solutions to kind of help with that, converting home spaces into workspaces. But the lines are blurred now between work and home, and that in itself can be a problem. Not just how do you get your work done, but how do you do it in a way that doesn't interfere with your home life, because it's a lot more intrusive now than it used to be.
Fantastic. Yeah, some other submitted questions were particularly around 3D printing and prototype printing. People wondering about the quality of the off-the-shelf 3D printer, and very concerned about speed. Are there other faster options than 3D printing for prototyping needs?
Yeah, so I think this is a really great question in terms of rapid prototyping. I think this is one of the biggest pain points that one of my mechanical engineers expressed to me, Irving. He said, when I was in the office, I had an idea. I just used to go to the lab and work it out quickly, and he's been very excited to go back in the offices, mostly because as engineers, you have lots of ideas, and what you don't want to do is theorize away your best concepts. You don't want to just sit in front of a desk or a computer and just analyze it to death, and then it goes away because it doesn't seem like it'll work. And especially mechanical engineers have a lot of intuition and use their hands in order to solve problems. So we've really talked about what are different ways that you can set up for rapid prototyping. And in this particular example, and we'll have another one later on, we had a mechanical engineer take home one of our 3D printers. And there are actually a lot of really great inexpensive 3D printers that we have in our offices just for quick prototyping, but that people can get in their homes. And this is maybe a good time for people to explore ones that you can even get just off of Amazon. And those can be just a few $100s. There are also more capable and much more higher resolution desktop examples like the Formlabs systems, which people can also use. They're a little bit more expensive in the thousands, but some people might find that useful in terms of having a home setup. And we also recognize that not everyone can have access to some of these more hi-fi systems. So sometimes it's just remembering that you can go back to your roots and use more lo-fi things that are available just around the house, just to have a sense of being able to move and play around with things. So X-Acto knives and paper, cardboard. I'm sure people are getting lots of packages at home, even clay and other prototype and building material. I have a daughter, so I have been raiding some of her supplies in order to create and make some simple mock-ups. So
yeah, Legos can be a great tool for building quick prototypes. So we generally use outside agencies to do rapid prototyping because we find that our time is well spent integrating and problem solving and troubleshooting, not necessarily in generating the parts, perhaps in modifying them. And so the nature of our work hasn't changed. We're just doing this from home now. And so we internally don't see a big demand to do rapid prototyping at home, but we are doing what Anne just described, which is finding ways to quickly breadboard concepts so that you can learn about these concepts without spending an inordinate amount of time. And that's important. It's something that we do at work, and it's a little more challenging at home to make sure that everybody has the tools and the resources, the materials that they need. And that's something that we're learning about. What does the engineer need at home that work can help provide so that they can continue to be efficient doing this breadboarding?
Great, and I can see in our chat a couple recommendations from our audience members mentioning the Prusa SL1 is another additive printing option. And then Doug has also suggested going back to simulation tools and simulation iteration and to replace some prototyping workflow. So great, thank you guys.
Yeah, so I love this. I love this picture. This is actually one of my favorite setups that that one of my members on my team has set up. And I think back to Chris's point that engineers are dedicated, resilient, and resourceful, and this is just another problem to solve. So access to specialty labs is a real issue. So as the shutdown was starting, we had a number of programs that were kicking off. One in particular needed a lot of hardware. It was an early stage development program, and we needed access to a wet lab and testing of early concepts and early prototypes. And one of the first things that we did when the shutdown was happening was do some risk assessments and talk about impacts of having to work from home, and highlighting where there might be challenges for us in order to continue moving forward and delivering for our clients. And so in this particular one, one of our lead engineers, Vivian, actually has a wet lab set up in her hallway in San Francisco, which is pretty amazing. So you can see a lot of the system is created out of 80/20, has a number of different pieces to it. And again, when we were talking about our risk assessments, we were also talking about, safety and, how do you set something up within your home and still be safe. I really like this. There's certain pieces of this particular layout that are worth noting. So again, how dedicated engineers can be. I think you can see just in the back there, there's a little call out to a door, which is actually their bathroom. So, it blocks the access to that when she's actually working on the system. You can also see that in this particular picture, there's some areas of collaboration which are called out. So originally the test setup was created by Kelsey and developed by Kelsey in order for Vivian to do the tests that she needed to do on the systems that she was creating. And then there's another picture of Vivian working alongside one of our electrical engineers, Vincent, who's also giving her she almost looks like she's MacGyvering some piece of the test equipment in order to get it up and running. But you can see there's a little video of Vincent that she was in real time debugging with him over FaceTime. So it's pretty cool.
That's great. These are great pictures. Fantastic.
Yeah, and I think that those previous pictures really go to showing how people are adapting with the spaces they've got. So there may be spaces in the house that weren't fully utilized, like that hallway outside the bathroom. Clearly there was more room there than they needed, and she's taken that opportunity to set up her own wet lab. And yeah, and that again, that gets to the blurred lines now between work and home. Certainly during this time when we're forced to work from home, there's a boundary that you have to cross in order to get work done. It'll be interesting to see how that changes going forward when there's more opportunity to work from the office as well. Another example of some setups that we have. So some people have more opportunity in their houses to set up shop. So these are some examples. We have an engineer who has a lathe in his basement and a milling machine. Not everybody has that, but if you do, and if you have the space for it, that's a great opportunity. You can take advantage of spaces in your house that maybe aren't utilized as well, like a shed outside, a garage, a common space that hasn't been used or isn't used as much during the day at home, and now is because there's work to do. These are all things that people are adapting and using to get the work done now that they're forced to be at home. The limited office and shop access that we're starting to have now is changing how we think about these spaces. It may be that some of these continue to be used for work because it's effective to do that. and going forward, we have to find what that balance is, what that right balance is. But you can see in the bottom, I guess it's the middle picture, that's a fairly elaborate setup for an electrical engineer with oscilloscopes and power supplies, function generators, soldering equipment. Some of that this person already has, but those are also tools that the company can provide if you know that someone needs that at home, and that may be a shift. So how does the company help the employee adapt by allowing them to take tools home that they might not have otherwise?
Yeah, and I'll just echo some of what Chris was saying, which is, we did have some members of our team take home some of these specialty equipment that we're talking about. So earlier I pointed out the 3D printer, and in this particular picture here, we have someone who had taken home an Instron machine in order to accomplish some of the testing that needed to happen on their program. And, I think that's something that's something that we're doing in the short term, but as Chris said, something that we will think about what we'll do there in the longer terms. Something like, the more expensive machines like Instron, probably they're going to stay back in the offices as we have limited access to them as things open up. But some of the less expensive 3D printers and electrical engineering equipment, that's not that expensive. They could just become standard kit for our engineers. The one last thing I want to mention on this page, which I think is also fun, is just the real opportunity for us to have some young interns working with us in our homes. And that's a great example of a little lab assistant that we have. And again, blurring the lines between kind of work and home, giving opportunities to young budding engineers. It's really great to see.
Right, that's an upside to the blurred line between work and home.
Absolutely, and I appreciate the fact that you guys securely applied the seatbelt to get the tester home.
Right.
I mean,
maybe
a car seat may have been
might have been a little safer, yeah.
But at a minimum, a seatbelt. So I appreciate that.
Right.
Fantastic. All right, let's talk about collaboration and creativity.
So on this front, collaboration and creativity, what we've been seeing is really around how are people connecting and interacting. We know that in the office, it's really easy to have these moments where you walk by a person's office and or you walk by a person's desk and you can have a casual chat about what's going on. Oftentimes this happens between meetings, or if you're at a desk and you see someone passing you. So, in this particular section, we really want to talk about ways that you can continue to promote that kind of creativity and collaboration, despite the fact that you're working remote, and even highlight ways that, in some ways, remote working has actually improved some of these, some ways in which people are collaborating.
Yeah, one good example of that is brainstorming. We all miss our whiteboards and the opportunity we have to get together in front of a large empty space that you can fill with ideas and move things around and interact organically. Large wall spaces. We have a conference room that has large boards that you can pin things to, and we use that to move ideas around and kind of collect the output of a brainstorm, try out different collections, different groupings, see how that feels, and then move it around. And you can do that collaboratively when you're in a conference room. What we're finding is there are ways to do that online also, and they have different benefits and different downsides. So collaborative documents like a presentation that's shared on SharePoint, for example, allows you to bring in pictures live, have a number of people look at them at the same time, move things around, create categories, do some groupings. This is an example. The image that you see, the left one is raw output from a brainstorm, sketches that people made either by hand or on a tablet. that were then uploaded into a presentation and then moved around and captured in groups. And that's the same sort of dynamic that we're looking for, that we get in a conference room where you're moving these things around. But it's different. It feels different. The dynamic isn't quite the same. There's a different level of interaction between the participants, but it's still possible to do that. And I think it'll be interesting to see the changes that have been enforced by working from home, I think, are forcing us to look for solutions in the digital space that help us do this, that help us do it remotely. It'll be interesting to see what comes out of this as we move along, as people start recognizing the need to develop digital solutions that do the same thing. Right now, we're making do with what we have, just like we are in our home space. We're doing that in our digital space. And I think there's a real opportunity for new apps or functions, features to be developed to help us do that.
Yeah, and just on this particular topic, I also think that one of the ways in which virtual working has actually improved our interactions and our collaborations is really around this idea that now everybody is remote. I spent a lot of my career working with people, being maybe the one person talking to a larger group somewhere else. Either that's where the center of mass of the project was, or the client is located in one place and you have to call in. And so it's always a little awkward to see the little faces on the screen and try to figure out who's saying what, or what kind of reactions people are having, and know that you're the big head on the screen as well, talking and maybe being irritating to the other people on the conversation. But what's nice now is that you can see everyone's face. It's almost this level playing field. And so in times when you're doing things like brainstorming or having really critical conversations, it feels like location and geography are not an issue. And I think that has been a real improvement. And to Chris's point, one of the things that we could potentially carry forward and in the work that we're going to do, and I think that's one of the benefits and of what we've found here.
So one of the submitted questions was, how do you best maintain strong communication between teams, hardware, software teams, as everybody's schedule and processes may not be entirely aligned or the same? And you have this mix of people who are in the office, out of the office, or just all entirely spread out.
Yeah. Sorry.
Go ahead.
I'll start this real quick, Chris. This is more just an intro. I think Chris probably has more specific tips, but I think this is a great question, mostly because it's a lot of this has to do with making sure you keep your relationships and your culture strong. And during this remote working, what we found is it's not just about getting work done. And that's a much more important point to understand. It's always important, but building relationships and culture and ethos around how work gets done, as well as your connection to the team, has become much more important as we've gone remote. And I think, as I mentioned before, we're missing these times when we can randomly walk up to a desk or a lab to find things out. And so finding ways to create these, I call it serendipitous moments, where either you find something out about what other people are doing, or you find a problem out that you didn't know about, or, you have a spark that's generated from having a conversation with someone else. These kinds of things are really important. And so in remote working, we have to find these virtual constructs to create these moments, because we're not just randomly getting them. So what it means is that leaders and managers have to really make more of an effort to build that up. And I think we've had a lot of success. We've only been doing this for about 3 months, but we've been building off of this relationship capital that we've created from all of the times that we worked before we were remote. Now we're kind of wearing that down. We have to think about how do we keep up that relationship capital and keep building it up for our teams.
Yeah, I think it's a really good point that Anne makes about the culture. Culture can be a really important part of the place you work. It certainly is at Cooper Perkins, and it's hard to maintain that when you don't have daily interactions. That's a big spice added to the mix, and without that, you have to find another way to foster that. There are some things that we do. Daily check-ins, daily project check-ins, for example, have proven to be really valuable. People like the daily reconnection, not just on the project, but just casually. Making space for informal conversations is really important. So at the beginning of a meeting, if people show up early, 5 minutes early, 2 minutes early, and have an opportunity to just talk, that's an effective way to get past the project specific work and get to more of the serendipitous talk that Anne was talking about. We're missing the informal, spontaneous interaction that people used to have just by walking past someone's desk or encountering them in the hallway or sitting at the kitchen counter looking at the whiteboard. We don't have those spontaneous actions anymore, so we have to create them. We have those daily interactions. We also have set up some informal channels. So on a chat room, for example, designated as informal space, invite people to come and just share, not necessarily project specific work, things that they're interested in. Part of the culture is the personalities. A big part of the culture is the personalities of the people who work there. And you don't want to bury that or ignore that. And these custom open environments allow some of that to come through. We have regular company meetings, and when we had those meetings when we were all in the office, it was more, the meeting portion itself was all about the business of the meeting, like what's going on. What we found is we start off the meeting with 5 minutes or so of people just talking about what they've been doing. Maybe there's an icebreaker question that you can send out just to get conversation flowing. I think that's really valuable. Another point about the level playing field that Anne was talking about, it can be easy to forget that we have these geographic distances between us, which is a positive thing, but it can also be something to pay attention to. So we have an office in Boston and we have an office in San Francisco, and they're 3 hours apart. It's very easy to forget that when you're just interacting with people remotely. And so you have to be aware that there are other constraints on people's time than the constraints that you have. And it's just another takeaway from this time that we're in right now. And recognizing that so that you can interact positively with people and not interfere excessively in their home life. Again, dealing with that blurred boundary between work and home is important to recognize. So make sure that people know when you're online and when you're off. And that's not just due to geography. It could be due to other factors like your home life. Like your kid is home now and you have to deal with them during certain hours of the day. So maybe your hours are shifted. Recognizing that and accommodating that can go a large way to making people feel like they're still part of an organization that cares about how they're doing.
Yeah, I mean, this is a huge topic. I mean, this is something that we could probably dedicate an entire webinar to. I just want to make sure we've got enough time for Q&A. So we're going to accelerate through this part of the presentation. Christy, just a few words on what we're seeing here.
Sure. Just a quick note. We find during normal design reviews, I should say, maybe this is new normal. So old normal, it's always a good idea to not rely on just flying through CAD because it can be distracting. It takes time. It may take you a while to find what you want. It's helpful to prepare a still image presentation beforehand. That also helps you think about what your message is and focusing the content on that. But now it's especially important because not everybody has the same bandwidth. And if you're zipping through CAD, someone who has a jumpy or laggy connection may miss a lot of what you're saying, and that can add time trying to back up and show people who didn't see what was going on. Stills are a good way to do that. People can get lost. You can always keep a CAD available in the background for deep dives as needed, but we find it really helps to prepare beforehand, get some stills, focus on what you want to talk about, and then just leave the live CAD as a backup.
Great. Yeah, and talk us through this next section here.
Yeah, so, beyond working with our internal teams, I think it was really important for us to talk about and mention, the challenges that you may have working with different partners. We're in this particular section are going to focus on manufacturing partners, but there are a lot of thoughts and items here that I think can pertain to lots of different vendors or partners. So it can be a vendor who's providing a specific material or component, or it could be industrial design or clinical partners. I think that there are a number of different things that we need to be aware of, and that we've found has helped us. One of the biggest pain points around manufacturing partners that we've talked about is really highlighting the fact that travel has been disrupted, and teams really can't go and see their vendors and their partners face to face. And oftentimes the challenge is that vendors don't always highlight or point out particular issues, and that's often why we feel like we need to go and visit them. Also, building up that trust and relationship is really important. So face-to-face meetings are one of the things that have been critical. So, really the section is trying to talk through, well, what are the things that we can do instead of meeting face-to-face? What are the items we should be concerned about as we think about the impact of some of these closures or slowdowns to our development process?
So yeah, it's interesting. This is, at Fictiv, we see this and we hear from our customers about this all the time. There's a fair amount of volatility. The relationship from a geopolitical perspective is changing almost daily. And, when it comes to international logistics and freight, there's so many moving pieces, and the ground definitely moves underneath us as we try to get product and parts from overseas. I know Fictiv is regularly publishing a logistics update for our customer to keep them appraised of some of the conditions and how lead times for logistics are changing in what way. Chris, any advice on this front above and beyond just trying to stay informed?
I think anticipate delays when you're planning your project. So recognize that you can't necessarily rely on overnight shipping when perhaps you have. We all love using McMaster and DigiKey because they can get us those parts the next day. And sometimes it's not them, it's the last mile shipping that has a problem because of the situation that we're in. So if you can avoid relying on that when you're doing your project planning, that helps. Give yourself a little more cushion there to make sure that you can absorb those delays when things happen. I've found that has been more impactful than delays associated with international shipping. Of course, I've relied more on the domestic last mile shipping. So perhaps that's not a fair comparison, but it is something to really consider when you're doing your planning, and make sure your team and your client are aware of those potential limitations.
Great. It's and before we start, we have a question from Peter about any thoughts on how to navigate the manufacturing cycle for this year. We normally visit our Chinese vendors at the start of the process and are not sure how to approach this for the coming year.
Yeah, I think this is a really great question. The next two slides try to hit that. I think this is a question that probably a lot of people have on their minds. I mentioned earlier in the presentation that one of the first things that we did as the shutdowns were happening was really to perform a project risk assessment. And one of the biggest items highlighted was really around manufacturers and vendor availability. And the importance of doing a risk assessment is to help identify areas which may be pain points, and then find ways to mitigate. So In this way, you know, we kind of came up with 4 main things that, that we were really looking at in order to help us plan and plan our programs and create some mitigation plans. So the first one is really to find and track vendor availability. So early on, some vendors were open, some have closed, some have reopened. But I think it's really important here to understand what your vendor network looks like, what your manufacturing partner looks like, and any other partners that you may be using for your project. And so what we did here was we also created in our vendor tracking system, we created essentially a COVID impacted vendor status to help us know and sort against who was currently open, not just track their capabilities, but then also look at being able to see what are other options. So, you know, you're really trying to understand what your schedule impact will be. Some of that is cost. Some of that is also about what kind of capabilities you'll have access to in order to accomplish your program. We also looked at what the supply chain health was, again, looking at and trying to identify alternatives to materials and components that we may need. Especially the challenge here is really long lead items, and so, you know, obviously cost and availability are really 2 drivers on that one, and so there's some real trade-offs that you have to make there, and then also safety impacts. So, you know, as people were transitioning home, some equipment, some components are also getting shipped to people's homes. So we also looked at that and tried to understand what challenges there may be, and then create mitigation solutions to make sure that people were able to stay safe despite the fact that they may be working at home. And then also any meetings that may still happen, again, taking into consideration the overall challenges with COVID on that front, that was really important for us. And then the last one, just setting stakeholder expectation. I think being able to talk with clients and internal stakeholders and other partners to make sure everyone was aware of the challenges that we may be having. So I think I mentioned earlier, you know, one of our partners was a clinical partner that we were using in order to get some test data back. And, you know, they just had to shut down for COVID. There was no other way that they were going to be able to do that program and the work that they needed to do for us. And so that was a significant impact on the overall schedule that we had going. We found ways to move around it, but we also recognized that there was going to be some changes and slowdowns, and had to reassess and reevaluate everyone's expectations around what was possible during this time.
Great.
And then, you know, beyond the risk assessments, you know, I think that that question that Hero had picked up was around, you know, how are we going to deal with vendors, especially if they're shut down or if we can't travel to see them. I think that I can think of 3 main alternatives to on-site visits that we have seen and we're going to continue to see in the near future. And these are things that I think people should really have in mind as they're thinking about their development programs. So the first is really looking at the capabilities of their vendors. I think vendor capabilities are going to increase, and if they don't, people are going to have to find more capable vendors, especially if your ability to travel and see what they can do is reduced. So again, like developing good, strong relationships with those vendors, understanding their capabilities, making sure that they can actually accomplish the work that they say they can. This one is a real challenge because top tier vendors have been pushing for becoming more capable, having more engineering on staff. We've seen that with companies like Apple and Google working with the top tier CMs like Foxconn and Pegatron. The real question is, are the smaller programs going to also see that that increase in engineering support on site at these CMs, both in different divisions and also in second and third tier vendors? So I think the future will see if, who are the big winners and losers on the manufacturing partner side, who will really step up and have more capable engineering teams. I think as developers, it's going to be on us to really really push hard on our vendors and see what capabilities they're going to bring to the table, especially if travel to their sites is going to be limited. The second thing in terms of alternatives to actually being on site for builds is really to also find partners with boots on the ground. So partners who can really help set the relationship and be your eyes and ears on the ground. They have the engineering knowledge and the ability to help transfer your designs to the CMs, because they've also already built up that relationship and the capital and trust that you often are looking for, which is why we oftentimes do the travel to these CMs. And there are actually a lot of vendor partners out there. Fictiv, as an example, is one of them. They're great. They have really great connection and network over in a number of different manufacturing partners. And they have engineering as well as the ability to help find vendors. There's also Dragon, Kaizen Dynamics, and BSG. So it's really about finding and creating those partnerships to help you be able to have some eyes and ears on the ground if you're not able to travel, and potentially use them as a more effective way to have your engineers stay here working on development and design while you have other people really being on the ground and helping to manage and set expectations with your vendors. And the final piece that I want to say is just really looking at potentially bringing build labs in-house. So a number of years ago, Synapse really took a strategic focus on creating internal build labs in order to help us improve the transfer to manufacturing. And that has really helped us strategically. It helps us with our create tried and true manufacturing processes hand in hand with our manufacturers remotely, which is very appropriate now. It allows us to create really great build documentation, like build layouts and work instructions, and that helps to reduce a lot of the ambiguity that you might have if you can't actually go on site to see what vendors are doing. And then finally, it allows manufacturers to be part of some early builds that are happening where there's a lot of work that's going on from the engineering and development side. So it allows you to have and create this partnership with your engineers. And the one example I'll say about this is we have a very large client. So one of our biggest clients actually is going through a build right now at Flex, and through our work with our build labs and helping with their vendor, making sure that they're more capable. They currently don't have anyone on site at the build. It's just going to happen with their vendors. And so again, this is another case of, we'll see how that goes. Everyone, it seems like it's going to be a positive result, but I think that it's a combination of a number of these different options, which we've started to set in place, but we'll see strategically if it'll actually be effective and productive.
Yeah, and I think a common theme here is using existing resources to new purposes, adapting to new purposes. So we've seen the value of having people with boots on the ground for the specific project that you're working on, and you can form partnerships with people who were there in order to make that better. That hasn't changed, but the new normal is kind of emphasizing that and perhaps providing more oxygen to this sort of solution to the problem. And so we're seeing that adapting through your relationships with vendors as well as just dealing with your own environment.
Yeah, I like the way you described it as the new normal. And I think that takes us to our last topic, which again, we're going to touch on very briefly because we want to allow enough time for questions. Moving forward, looking ahead, Anne, can you just really quickly summarize for us kind of some real, one or two real key things that you really want our audience to think about moving forward?
Yeah, I think that, like you said, there's this new normal. I think as we move back in the offices, we're really going to have to think about what are the efficient ways we're going to work together. I think we showed here a number of different layouts for home offices, but back in our offices, I think we're going to focus on how we have lab spaces and assemblies and much more collaborative spaces, maybe less so than desk spaces, because people might be working at home. We also, like I said before, we're looking at having more capable vendors and partners. And then generally speaking, I think, I think what people want to be doing is really thinking more strategically about what development looks like. So there's going to be greater use around planning and testing, and using simulations. I think I saw someone commenting about that, and that's something that we've thought about a lot over at Synapse. And then, really, if just to wrap up, if there was one takeaway that I want to leave people with is really beyond the strategy and beyond the actual practical tools and setups that you can use. I think really looking at the relationship and the collaboration that people do, both in terms of working remotely with your internal teams and remotely with your vendors and partners, that's going to be a real key for us in the future. It's not as easy to think about what we need to do remotely, because we're just starting to figure out how to do it. But some real creativity around how we set that up and manage that is going to be really important moving forward.
And Chris, just a few words about coordinating work virtually versus in person.
Right. I think all these solutions hinge on communication. Communication helps facilitate the natural interaction that generates the culture that you want, but it also gives us an opportunity to see what works, talk to your people, find out what they're doing, find out what's not working, find out what is working, change things up, adapt, so that you have an opportunity to make positive changes to make people more efficient and more productive. Allow people to take tools home. Maybe you need a checkout process for that. Find out how to give people access to tools that they can't take home, and still maintain safety and efficiency in the use of those tools. Develop safety protocols if you need to, in order to make sure that people have safe access to the office or the tools that are in the office. And it all comes down to communication, making sure that they know what to do when they need to go use a tool, or how to get a tool if they want it, and make sure your clients and your vendors also understand what your protocols are like for office visits. That's all going to be important as we move forward.
Great, thank you. Just a quick reminder for those of you on the webinar, I mean, if you stick with us through the Q&A period, which we're going to go to next, we'll be picking 5 people to win a $50 Steam gift card. So Q&A, let's see. Let's take some questions from the field. I think there were some questions earlier on about the separation between work and life, and we touched on that a little bit, but how do we draw appropriate lines?
I think it has to be very individual. So people have different tolerances for work injecting into life, home life, and you have to give people the flexibility to define what that means to them.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, Chris. And I think that some people like to have very strict boundaries, and one of the ways, especially when those lines are really blurred, some of the ways that we've suggested to help people really set more compartmentalized work hours, is to find small ways to make routines where it's the start of your day and the end of your day. So it might be obviously getting ready for work and having your commute be from the kitchen to your desk, or having a walk outside or around the block and come back. And then when it's time to leave work, go and have another walk around the block, and now you're home. And, I think that we've also talked a lot with our team just about, different ways in which communication can seep into your personal life, and try to be clear that, just because something pops up on Teams or a chat, that, we all know that some people are working at different times, and it doesn't mean that every single person has to be online and working at the same hours that others are. So.
There's a great question from Jose. Jose mentions a lot of these adaptions, and he was thinking about the images we were showing of the kind of work at home environment. He mentions a lot of them are highly correlated to the space and equipment we personally own. How do we keep this from disproportionately putting younger or employees that don't own this equipment at a disadvantage?
Or space. So a lot of younger employees or engineers don't have a house. They're renting an apartment, or they're living in a smaller space than people who've been around longer, and that can be a real issue as well. I think it comes down to finding what works and what doesn't work, and making sure that people have a way of communicating that, making sure that because we know not all these solutions are going to work for everybody, make sure there's a way to iterate on that and find something that does work. And it may be allowing them to bring tools home. It may be helping them get a standing desk inside somewhere. It may be giving them an opportunity to use a space in their home by using material from work, something like that. I think it's very individual, and it can be a real challenge for those who have less space or haven't had the opportunity to develop a sophisticated home shop.
Yeah.
I think you guys in kind of senior management roles, how would you feel if as a direct report was very honest with you and said, look, in order to do my work, I need these things? I would imagine the cost and justifies itself very quickly.
Yeah. And I think early on, that was one of the things that we created, was essentially a budget for people to go out and get the things that they need in order to set themselves up for success within the homes. And I think, to what Chris is saying is that we're going to look very carefully about what standard toolkits at home might look like, and some of them, just to make sure that everyone has the same level of capability. Some of them could be some of the less expensive but highly capable pieces of equipment, like USB microscopes and digital oscopes, and inexpensive 3D printers, things like that. I'm hoping that people did see and notice that there were a number of different examples of setups that people could have, and really from anywhere from hi-fi to lo-fi, and really look at ways to be inventive and hopefully get some ideas. And it's not always it's true, not everyone has the same access to different things, but there are a lot of people who have been inventive, and there are a lot of great examples out there of what people are doing to really set themselves up.
Great. Another really interesting question from Giovanna. Has anyone used AR or VR in the process for simulation, prototyping, etc.?
Yeah, I really like this question as well. So another thing that we've been thinking about strategically, because we have done a lot of AR, VR development, is just what AR and VR will do in the coming development processes. So, I didn't really touch on it here, mostly because I felt like that was a little bit of future thinking, and maybe didn't apply broadly to people at the moment. But there is a lot of work that is going on around in that space. And, I think that the price of AR, VR equipment is coming down Steam, for example, is open source, and so there's a lot of work that's going in a lot of development that's going into making these systems more available. And so again, being able to walk into the lab and look around a piece of hardware that, you know, people might be looking at, could be a CAD machine. You can meet people in this virtual space. I definitely think that that's a place that we may see development going in the near future.
I think there's a lot of potential there. It hasn't been realized yet, but there's definitely an interesting potential there.
Great. This is going to be our last question from Jennifer. Are you keeping more of your development resources in the US versus Asia? And I guess that question could apply to any locale overseas versus domestic.
Yeah, that's great. So at the moment, most of our development resources are in the United States. Most of our are here domestically, as opposed to over in Asia. You know, that will continue to be true, but we also have offices that we are bringing up and developing in Asia, specifically because there's a lot of manufacturing and a lot of, frankly, engineering opportunities that are going on in Asia.
We do all of our technical development in the US in our 2 offices, but we do use overseas fabricators quite a bit for parts. We see a lot of value in doing that. But we do all of our technical work in the US.
Great. Well, I think that brings us to the end. I just wanted to thank everybody for joining, and particularly thank you, Chris and Anne.
Thank you.
This was just a fantastic array of expertise and experience. And again, to our audience members, thank you for participating and sharing with us your questions and your comments. As I mentioned earlier, we'll be making this content available and the recording of this webinar available afterwards. And yeah, again, thank you everybody for participating. Thanks to our guests, and on behalf of Fictiv, thank you for joining our webinar on how to build physical products in the new virtual world. Take care, everybody. Please stay safe, and we'll see you all soon enough.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks. Bye.